Today I have a wonderful guest named Dr. Joel Rosen. Dr. Rosen is originally from Canada, has undergraduate degrees in exercise physiology and psychology, and graduated with a doctorate of chiropractic medicine. He since moved to South Florida with his wife, started a family and his business, where he is now known as the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja. Dr. Joel Rosen is the founder and creator of the Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, the website, the online support group, and the YouTube channel, all dedicated to women and men who are overwhelmed, overstressed, and left searching for answers by the modern healthcare system. His goal is to help redefine a new health paradigm for those who are sick and suffering from fatigue. Joel, welcome. Thank you for coming on here. Really, really appreciate your time today. I always like to start these interviews with gratitude. So if you could share with us just 3 things you're grateful for today, please.
Oh, for sure. I'm grateful for waking up this morning. I'm grateful for my family, and I am grateful for the work that I do, that I get so much fulfillment in helping people that are suffering. So those are 3 things right off the top of my head.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit. I always like to start with where you came from. So if you could describe to us a little bit where you're from specifically and what life was kind of like growing up for you.
Sure. So I grew up in Toronto, in Canada, and it was freezing cold weather. And every kid that's born in Canada comes out of the womb with a hockey stick. So I played hockey for several years until I didn't grow as big and fast and tall as the other kids and realized that it wasn't a sport that I enjoyed. So I focused all my efforts on soccer, and I was really a jockey, more into sports kind of kid. And I went to my undergraduate was in exercise physiology, Seth. And then I realized after hurting my back that I wanted to become a chiropractor. But unfortunately, my first 2 years of undergraduate, my grades were really lousy. I wasn't really concerned about school. I was more concerned about social life and playing on the soccer team. And so I went back to school and I got a degree in psychology and got my GPA up. And I almost decided to go into psychology instead of getting my GPA up for chiropractic. And then I ultimately moved to the States to go into chiropractic college. So that's sort of the abbreviated, quick version of my life there.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. Thank you. Is there an impactful memory that you have from your youth that you could share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I think that it was when I hurt my back. And I was a trainer, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I had graduated with my exercise physiology degree, and I did try in my last 2 years, but it wasn't really aiming for anything. And I was a personal trainer, and I injured my back. And the model was, okay, go get surgery. And I was an exercise physiology background. I was a personal trainer. And I was very holistic, and I was against what my traditional family of doctors and nurses wanted me to go that route. So that was a pivotal time because it was an epiphany for me when I had a chiropractor help me. And I was angered in the fact that I would have gone under the knife and who knows what would have happened, maybe nothing. But at the same time, I think the first alternative was to know what I know and rehab it from a holistic point of view. So that sort of stands out in my mind as a polarizing time when I realized that my health and my philosophy of holistic approaches was put to the test, and I followed through with what my belief systems are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely relate. I've had some sports injuries. I played soccer also. I was wanting to play professionally and on that route, and along come injuries, and drugs and surgery are generally the first things that modern allopathic medicine goes to. So I understand, and I can relate to the difficulty in the decision making when having to handle these types of situations, but with like passion and frustration and all these things that are going on, especially when we're young. Because we have a hard enough time dealing with emotions, things like that. So And a little bit more from your past, was there anybody that had anybody in your life that had a really significant influence growing up?
You know, I would never have answered my father in the past because I had a very estranged relationship with him. And he's a lawyer, and I didn't get along with him. So the last thing I wanted to do was to become a lawyer, right? So when I decided to go back to school and get my GPA up with my psychology degree, I was able to I got my GPA up and I reapplied to the Canadian Chiropractic College, and I didn't get in because I didn't do my due diligence, realizing that it didn't actually improve my GPA because it was part-time studies. And the criteria was based on full-time studies. So I knew at that point, okay, I have to go to the US. And at that point, I had 2 undergraduate degrees, Seth, and their entry requirements were different. In Canada, it was you could have any degree. You could have an English degree. You could have a music degree. They wanted an eclectic background. In the US, you didn't need a degree. You needed organic chemistry, physiology, so here I was 25 years old, and I graduated from high school 7 years prior. And I had to go back to school to take organic chemistry and chemistry. I had the anatomy, I had the biology, and I actually had to take English too. And I approached my father, and we weren't close even then. And I said, hey, listen, I don't want to go through Canada schools because it's going to take me years to get these courses. I could take a 6-week accelerated program in the US that allows you to just get these, sort of like a really easy, fast-tracked approach to getting into chiropractic college. And he said no. And after that, it was like, okay, I'll just prove to you that I will do this on my own. So in a weird way, it was more of him saying no and me being so determined that it was like burning the boats. I wasn't turning back. I was decisive. I knew it was what I wanted to do. And it was a pivotal time where I could have folded up tent and be miserable thereafter. And since then, I've accepted that gift of denial as A, I would never do that to my own kids. And B, I harnessed that wind in my sails to not push me backwards, but to sort of jig and jag to get me to where I wanted to go to.
That's great. Yeah. Sometimes I've noticed the greatest lessons for us are something we would never think that's a lesson or going to be valuable to us in the future. And we look back and it's just, that was a pivotal moment in our life. And it really shows your determination to do what you wanted to do.
Right.
So that's great. Yeah. So currently in your life, what do you feel is the biggest blind spot in your life?
Currently, my biggest blind spot. It's a good question. As far as, I guess, so, oh no, that's a good question. As far as my biggest blind spot, I guess I'm aware of what I don't know. And when I have a patient, I see patients now all over the world that are, I would say, the biggest perfect storm, no easy solution, been to 18 doctors and no one's figuring it out. So I guess my blind spot is knowing that there's blind spots and figuring them out, what they are, and not accepting no for an answer. And ultimately knowing, I think this is a big one, is with certainty, knowing that the body has the ability to heal itself, even if you're not sure what it is, and having faith in that there are blind spots. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but I believe my biggest blind spot is knowing that I have blind spots and harnessing that energy and assuming guilty until proven otherwise, and approaching it with a scientific way of, a hypothesis of, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to see if the result changes, and then therefore be open to, however, like no preconceived ideas as to what the outcome is going to be. Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. I mean, the awareness of your lack of awareness, basically.
Right, exactly.
So I can understand that. I think that is a good answer. Let's see. So this is also a fun one. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh, wow. I would have tried. I would have had more confidence. I'm from a family of medical doctors, and I never thought that I was smart enough, because I was I guess, an attention deficit kid that was hyperactive and anxious and had a real tough time focusing in school. And it was amazing when I realized, oh, when I actually pay attention and when I actually do the work, this stuff's easy. So I wish I would have told my younger self that you have what it takes. You need to believe in yourself and apply yourself. And I think I would have accelerated. It's always, I have a podcast too, and I asked the question to my guests, what would you have changed knowing what you know now? Sort of along the same lines that you're asking me. And it's one of those things that you had to go through it to be able to learn that lesson. Yeah. So, but at the same time, I wish I would have had more confidence. I wish that I would have applied myself a little bit earlier so that I would have gotten to where I wanted to get to faster. But had I not gone through those, I wouldn't have developed the scars and the beauty marks along the way, right?
Yeah, all those lessons. Yeah, those pearls of wisdom that you can only gain through experience.
Right, exactly.
So, and shifting gears a little bit to the topic of mindfulness, and this is a big topic of conversation these days. And I'm curious what mindfulness means to you.
It's huge. I regretted for a long time my degree, because I had my second degree, the psychology degree, because if I would have just gone to the States right away, I won't say wasted, but I wouldn't have used up 2.5 years of my life getting that degree, only to realize after, when I work with my burnt out, exhausted patients, how important that mindfulness is and how I have that background. So it was really a gift. So mindfulness to me is understanding that there's an energetic mind-body connection that can't be disconnected. And it's weird that people would even think the mind and the body are two different things. It controls one another, and it's a dual relationship. And you have not just the mind body, but you have psycho, neuro, immuno, endocrine. The entire system works together. And you can really harness that tool and that power in your favor when you're exhausted and burnt out. So I really believe in the ready, fire, aim, instead of ready, aim, fire. Really understand that you can manifest a lot of what it is that you're thinking, whether it's good or bad. So why not choose that good thing? And why not harness the energy that it feels when you reconnect to the coherence of that frequency of, the glass, when you touch a glass or a opera singer sings and she sings at a pitch and that frequency causes the glass to break. That's coherence. So you're at a really good resonance. You're at the same frequency as something. So if you're really in a bad place, you're going to manifest more of it if your frequency is at that wavelength. On the flip side, if you're in a good place, or if you're not in a good place, but you can manifest that, especially with gratitude. That's how important gratitude is. And feeling that gratitude and that gratefulness, next thing you know, you start manifesting that energy and you get more of it. It's like if you had a punch buggy car and you notice all these punch buggy cars, you see all of them. It's what you see is what you get. So why not stack the cards in your favor? So it's a big part of my philosophy in general.
No, that's great. You said, I really like a lot of things you said in there. I've never heard that ready, fire, aim. I like that, because a lot of times when we're ready, then we start aiming, and that's when we start overthinking, and that's when we hesitate, and that's when we don't pull the trigger.
Right. And we also think when I'm this, I'll do that, but we never get this to do that. Right.
Yeah. Because we always think, like you were talking about coherence and frequency. I found that, and I've been in this place in my life where I think I can always get higher or be better or do more before I get to that thing. And you just got to do it.
Right.
That's the only way. And sometimes we're never ready until we begin, until we've already begun.
I'll give you a quick lesson where that applied to me. So when I went to chiropractic college in the US, the Canadian dollar was 68 cents to the American dollar. And I didn't have a lot of financing. And because there is a chiropractic college in my province, I didn't qualify for provincial loans, because there's Canadian loans and provincial loans. So I didn't know how I was going to fund my school. I just knew that I was going to do it. I had, say, the first trimester paid for. And there was a lot of sleepless nights when I would go to bed and thinking, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to do this? But they had basically lending programs for Canadian students. And I always say it was like Luigi and Vince's lending programs, because the interest rates were crazy. And I remember my friend saying to me, what are you thinking? He's my best man for my wedding. Like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? It's like, you know what? I'd never even considered it being an option of failing. I never considered that. It wasn't an option for me, because he was saying, like, what if you don't do it and you don't get the money? And it's like, that wasn't an option for me. I burnt the boats. I knew I was going to do it. This is what I've been called on to do. And that sort of is that same thing of having that certainty of you have no option but to succeed. You're thrown in the water. You either sink or swim. And a lot of power comes from that.
Mm-hmm. It's the medical version of SEAL training.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So what's an example or a few examples of how you incorporate mindfulness into your work?
I mean, it's a big part of, I have a coaching program now that I work with my patients, and we have something called a self-analyzer. So it has 4 different areas for them to look at their physical health, their environment, their purpose, and their relationships. And within each one of those, there's 4 subcategories. And so I find that's a missing piece of the puzzle when people are looking for answers with their health. I always say they're looking in the rear view mirror of what's not working, where they are, but they're not looking ahead to where they want to go. And when you put in a GPS settings where you want to go, you don't put in where you are. You do to know how to reverse engineer where you're going. And so I make it a big part of it is, yes, I want to know objectively, are your lab results that are outliers or smoke signals or red flags, are they getting better, and what do they mean, and how do we improve them? But at the same time, what does that improvement give you? What are you going to do with it? And I've had plenty of patients where they've been so muddled in the research in their labs, and I sort of knock on the computer desk, like on the windows, like, hey, like, snap out of it. What would you do if you felt better? What if those results showed differently? What would you be doing with those results? And that's really important. So it's a big part of what I do, because if you don't know what you're going to be doing with the results that you have, how can you benchmark whether or not you're making progress? So it's a fundamental criteria for healing in general.
I totally agree. There's so much to that. I've heard so many stories of people coming down with life-threatening diseases, whether it's cancer or something else. And some people, as soon as they get a diagnosis, it's like a few weeks later, they're gone. Others, it's a mindset thing. It's like, oh, I'm moving through this and I'm living my life. And years later, they're still doing their thing. And yes, everybody's different, situations are different, but I've just heard so many of these stories at this point that there's definitely something to what you're saying, that your outlook and we're having that goal in mind, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that where you're headed, and just moving in that direction, despite what's sitting in front of you, is so valuable. So valuable.
Right. Yeah.
So are there any specific ways that you practice mindfulness in your own life, and how have they impacted you?
Yeah. So I've come from that mindset of I was never enough, and insecurity and anxiety. And the 2 practices that I always seem to deviate from, but always get back into and attempt to be more and more consistent on it, is not just gratitude. I think gratitude is huge. And I'm impressed that was our first questions on the interview, but on celebrating. And we don't celebrate enough. And no matter how small they are. You know, one of my biggest fulfillments is I remember going to see my grandmother in a nursing home. And I remember there was a Korean lady that didn't have anyone visiting her. And I was a young kid, and I went to talk to her, and we didn't really understand each other, but I was with her. And my mother said to me, "That was really nice, like, that you did that." And I said, I kind of did it for a selfish reason, because it just made me feel so good. right? And I think that when you help people, or that's a big one. When you help people, you get rise, tides lift all ships, if you will, and you get a release of actually oxytocin that helps you feel better. So a celebration is a little bit of a kiss of that every day. And so I make sure I celebrate my wins, or I celebrate just little small things. Like today, instead of wanting that, say, pizza slice, I decided not to, and I went for a walk, right? So little small things that celebrate and build momentum on it, because with the people I work with that are so sick, they don't have a lot to celebrate, and they don't have that energy and frequency to celebrate. So having them understand the small little things, the little shades of gray, are going to make the more blacks and whites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a huge difference. Thank you. So moving into more of what you actually do, and I've heard you say a few times that a lot of your patients are very sick, or they at least they feel very sick. But you've had your own health journey. So can you share with us a little bit about that story and what you went through and kind of how you moved through it?
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't have the best diet as a kid, lots of sugary foods, lots of processed foods. And then I was an anxious kid, and then graduated from chiropractic college with a lot of debt and a lot of caffeine, a lot of stress. And when it came time to practice, I actually re-injured my back. And that was the reason why I went back to school in the first place. And I re-injured it, and I was in a bad place, and I was exhausted. I was burnt out. I was tired. I didn't have motivation. I didn't have libido. I would crash in the middle of the day. And in some epiphany of a way, a patient of mine who's an acupuncturist gave me a book called "Why Do I Have Thyroid Symptoms Even Though My Blood Tests Are Normal?" I'm like, what's the I don't. So I let it sit on my desk for about 6 months, and then I opened it up, and there was a chapter on adrenal fatigue, and it was like a picture of me was in there in terms of the prototypical what is it, and how does it present. And I'd never heard of it. And I thought, I had finished chiropractic college. I had finished psychology degree. I'd never heard of this. And if I've never heard of this, who else hasn't heard of this? So I went down those rabbit holes, and I wasn't getting answers by the doctors I was seeing. And I was being told that nothing was wrong, that my tests were normal, that I needed to go on medications, anxiety, maybe I need to see a social worker. And it was an awful experience. So I made sure that I was going to figure this out, and I'm going to make sure that I get my answers, I get my health back. And it really carved the way of what I wanted to do with my own practice and who I wanted to help. And now that's the name of the website that I have. Is called The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, because it's not a legitimate diagnosis for a lot of doctors. And the further you go down those rabbit holes, and I've been going down those rabbit holes for a decade or longer, that it comes down to cellular energy 101. When we're stressed out, it doesn't just impact your stress system, your brain and your adrenal glands and all the cells, but it impacts your body's ability to just make energy at the cellular level. So that's what I do now. And that's sort of the journey I've been on, is understanding how stress impacts your body and how that impacts your body's ability to make energy. And now I keep it as simple as, if you don't have enough energy to meet your daily demands, your body is going to be in a deficit. I mean, that's just like economics.
Mm-hmm.
And then your body's going to make important decisions as to what you're going to do with the limited resources. And like a female who gets really low on her body fat, she's not going to have periods any longer, because reproduction is not important. And that happens a lot too with men and their libido and their sex drive and so forth. So it's my journey was one where I'm grateful that I had that, and I changed my paradigm, and I'm not miserable about it. And I don't loathe it. I embrace it because it helped me figure out what I needed to do to fix my health and what I've been called on to do to help other people.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I was reading about you a little bit, and you say that your purpose is to help redefine a new health paradigm for those who are sick and suffering from fatigue by scrutinizing the latest health-related research and boil it down in a clear, concise, and actionable way. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it kind of parlays from what we were just talking about. So ultimately, a lot of people will now say, well, it's all about the mitochondria. It's all about the mitochondria, and the mitochondria being the power plants of the cell. And what I've learned going down these rabbit holes is we need to have bioavailable copper and other minerals to be able to power the mitochondria. And because of our minerals in our soils, because of the glyphosates in the pesticides, because of the iron enriched filings, because of the pollutants and the exhaust. I mean, it's kind of like the sky's falling in this regard of how bad and toxic the world is, and how there's a lot of political, financial backings behind profiteering and behind the pharmaceutical industry. And really, it comes down to common sense stuff: healthy nutrition and healthy thoughts, healthy relationships, and getting outside and having sunlight and earth and grounding and so forth. So it's kind of like a return to basics and not rocket science, and really focusing on helping your body heal naturally through what the earth has provided. I guess that's kind of what I meant by a paradigm shift. It's not just about pharmaceutically supporting yourself or having a diagnosis. It's about lifestyle changes. And it's about understanding that it's not just this diagnosis or that diagnosis. It's really a supply and demand problem. Your body's not making energy effectively at the level that it needs to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were talking about the pharmaceutical industry, and in my experience, just pharmaceuticals, they're never a cure. And if we want to heal from something, like you said, we have to go back to basics, and you have to get the foundation solid first, and then you can build on top of that. And that's how health is created from my experience.
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
So functional medicine, what is it? What attracted you to this type of practice? And how do you practice differently than other functional medicine doctors?
So functional medicine is really looking at a sort of the D pluses and the C minuses before they're the Fs, if you will, because the way the lab ranges are set up is they're so broad. And if you're not sicker than the average sick person, and we're getting sicker and sicker, I think 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. So if you're not sicker than them, you're told you're normal. So functional medicine really looks at the labs at a tighter range to see some of these changes. And I always use the analogy, it would be like traditional medicine is like waiting for little Johnny to get an F before he gets extra help. Functional medicine is helping him when you see that he's struggling and he's getting a C minus. That's functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
As far as how I do it differently, no one's had the background that I've had and not to say it's better or worse, but I've had my own health challenges. I come from a traditional family of medical doctors. I had a psychology and exercise physiology background. I injured my back. And then really what I did was I went down the genetic rabbit holes, because there's so many insights in terms of genetic susceptibilities. Why do some people have Alzheimer's in the family? Or why is there autoimmunities or cancers or cardiovascular diseases or migraine headaches or allergies, whatever it may be? So there's a relationship there. So I went down those rabbit holes and have continued to go down there. And what I found is more assume guilty until proven otherwise. The people that get hit the hardest have the biggest genetic susceptibilities with not being able to use oxygen to make energy. And so we assume guilty till proven otherwise. We understand the importance of some very important markers that aren't tested in traditional medicine, like copper, ceruloplasmin. No one looks at vitamin A. And on top of that, they're taught incorrectly, even when they are looking at some of these things. And they're looking at something as an iron deficiency anemia. And I really believe there's no such thing as an iron deficiency anemia. That doesn't mean you don't have low iron in your blood. You can have very high iron in your tissues, up to 10 times more, but it's not getting out of the tissues into the blood to use for oxygen and energy production. And doctors aren't taught this. And then what they do is they yell at that deaf person louder because it looks like there's no boats in the ocean, so they put more, boats in the ocean. It looks like there's no iron in the blood, so they give iron transfusions, only to realize that doesn't fix why there wasn't iron in the blood in the first place. So that's a huge difference of what I do. And then on top of that, helping people take their glucose and their ketone tests, circadian rhythm improvements, seasonal variation in our diet, because we've been, I guess, programmed over the millennia that when there's different seasons, there's different eating styles, and depending on where our ancestors were born will depend on how our genes sort of played out. Also, there's monthly cycles. We understand monthly cycles for women, but we don't understand that for men, but it still happens. And then there's circadian cycles as well. So I put all those pieces together.
Very cool. Very cool. And there's different types of stress. What are some of the ways that people can distinguish between an acute stress problem and a chronic stress problem?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, looking in the mirror for one, right? I mean, obviously, if you've had a overt what's been going on in the world, with isolation and mandates and restrictions, that's very stressful. And how does that impact you? What's going on with your family members, your finances? I mean, it's no rocket science when I talk to patients and I get an understanding of, okay, why are we talking? And they tell me all the things they're going through, and they need to be aware that that's impacting them. So I think it's coming down to just taking inventories on what are your stressors in your life and how are you approaching them from a interpretation standpoint. So if something changes, there's an acute stressor, maybe you got sick, or there was a physical trauma, or there's an emotional thing that happened, or with your kids or your parents. So that's not rocket science. It's more as far as chronic stressors. If you've been tired, if you're not sleeping effectively, if you're not waking up recharged, if you're crashing in the middle of the day, if you feel overwhelmed, if you have brain fog, you have joint pains, you have motivation issues, there's been a chronic stress. And to sort of segue from your question, what the number one stress in the body is the body's inability to make energy effectively. And when it doesn't make energy effectively, it makes exhaust. It's like smoke coming out of the tailpipe. And that's the number one stress. When your body's not able to use oxygen to combine the food you eat and make energy, it's going to make exhaust. And that's the number one stress in the body. So emotional things can make that worse. Physical things can make that worse. So you really have a sort of an external stress on the body that gets internalized, and we got to make more energy. And it's either going to make more ATP and put more torque in the engine and take off, or the engine's going to be inefficient. There's a lot of more smoke coming out of the tailpipe.
Yeah. So you were saying that you were talking about how the body makes energy, and obviously it utilizes the mitochondria, but how do you address this with patients? How do you get them to utilize these things? In obviously broad terms, but how do you get people to be able to start producing more energy?
I mean, that's a good question. So it's looking at their diet, right? And look, would your grandmother or great grandmother recognize this food as a food that she ate in her day, right? I mean, is it out of a package? Is it artificially created? Is there a lot of preserved foods in there, or preserved ingredients, food colorings? Is it non-organic? I mean, getting good quality food and getting good quality minerals in the food. Our cells run on minerals, right? And that's number one. I need to look at a test to objectively know like where you are on the roadmap, what's going on. And that's typically indicative of basic tests like iron, ferritin, hemoglobin, hematocrit, transferrin, ceruloplasmin, copper, RBC, magnesium, vitamin A, when you look at those markers, Seth, you can see smoke coming out of the tailpipe if they're not in the ideal ranges. And then once you see those, now you can put together a strategy to improve those, not just eating healthy, but also reducing the demanders, right? That means gratitude, celebration, reframing how stressors happen to you, having better relationships, getting outside, moving, reducing the demands that's causing you to have these decreased energy and increasing the supplies. And the increasing the supply is not just supplements. It's the diet variations, it's the movements, it's the sleep quality, it's the light exposures. There's so many different things, but basically, I guess it's a matter of taking inventory and lowering the demands for energy and increasing the supply for energy.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, I mean, your psychology degree, I can really see how this actually helps people, because sometimes we don't know what's stressing us. We're just in such in our normal routine of things that we don't know where these things are coming from. And creating that awareness about what can be causing us these stressors is probably something I would imagine you're pretty good at, given the other degree that you have.
Yeah, it's kind of like habituation. Like you forget that you're wearing a ring, right? Because your body's adapted to it.
Yeah.
But unless you actually change, maybe you get a little more swelling in your ring, or you catch it on something. Now you're aware it's there, right? So you're right. A lot of people aren't aware of their stressors, and they say like, oh, I have a good family life. My relationships are good, but stress is also the mold that's in your house that you're not aware of. Stress is also the silver amalgams that are in your teeth, right? I mean, stress is a lot of different things that our body is just adapted to, albeit at a lower energy, a lower frequency, but we don't really pay attention to it at a level like I had a conversation with someone the other day, and his ferritin, his iron, his hemoglobin, he's taking testosterone, and they were at absurdly high levels, and he felt like it was no problem for him. And I said, well, why are we talking then? and he said, well, I don't have libido, motivation, and drive, but it's not a problem for me. Well, how do you know that? Like, so what we think's a problem and what really is the problem are two different things, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And you were alluding to saying that you said there's different types of stress, internal and external types of stress. Are there differences in how these stresses affect or show up in the body that you've noticed? Are there specific organs that are kind of affected through in certain environmental stresses versus certain emotional stresses, things like that?
That's where the DNA test can be really helpful, because then I always say that's where we see it's a lot of the foundations are similar for everyone, right? If I don't have the right ingredients to make energy, then everyone's going to have those challenges. Everyone has the way, like going back to science and going back to grade 11 or 12 chemistry, and you have glycolysis and Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. That's how we make energy. We make energy anaerobically without oxygen. We burn glucose, or we make energy with oxygen and we burn fat. And ultimately, if we don't have the cofactors, the necessary ingredients to do that, then we're not going to make energy at high levels. So everyone has that. But where they have differences is, where do the weak links in the chain break? So some people will have weak links in the chain that breaks in their GI health, and they have celiac disease, or they have Crohn's or IBS or colitis. Other people might have neuroinflammation and progressive neurological conditions, Alzheimer's. So it really depends on where the weak links in the chain break will impact the different tissues. The ones that are most metabolically active, liver, pancreas, heart, brain, muscles, those are going to be impacted more too, because they demand more oxygen to produce energy. So yeah, I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Okay. And you mentioned before sleep. How important, or what role does sleep play in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. If you don't have good sleep, you're not recovering, right? You're not going to have that drainage of they call it the glymphatic system in the brain. So just the releasing of the new sort of waste removals in the brain. If you don't reach a certain level of REM sleep, you're not going to recover. You're not going to release growth hormone. You're not going to repair and rebuild and detoxify. So it's super important for sure.
Okay. And one of the terms that you had mentioned before was adrenal fatigue. So you've gone down that rabbit hole for about a decade, you said. So can you explain what adrenal fatigue is? Because you said it's not a legitimate diagnosis. I mean, it's not something that allopathic medicine labels. And
Right.
they say they have reasons for it, whatnot, but because the adrenals have enough adrenaline in them, they never get depleted. So what have you found out of, and why is it called adrenal fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, the theory is that when we get stressed out, or when we have stress in general, the brain signals to the adrenals to make cortisol and other stress hormones, DHEA, aldosterone, and there's a lot of different hormones that it makes that balances our minerals, our fluid, our energy, our inflammation. And over repeated stressors over time, the adrenals will stop producing the level of cortisol that is a baseline amount. And there's a diagnosis called adrenal insufficiency, and it's called Addison's disease. It goes back to the 1800s. And the majority of people that have fatigue and exhaustion have low adrenal function, but not enough to be below that threshold to be diagnosed as insufficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's being told that it's normal. And there's a lot of problems with that, because ultimately up to 90% of the breakdown occurs outside the adrenals. Right. So maybe the brain isn't signaling to the adrenals as effectively, even though when you knock on the door to the adrenals, they open the door and they respond at a minimal level to not call it insufficiency. So the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and the problem could be that your cortisol doesn't have the ability to get into the cell because it's bound up to a protein and there's not a lot of free fraction, or you're deactivating the active form into the inactive form, or your liver is not clearing it out. There's so many things that go wrong that doesn't allow for a healthy stress response. So now we'll call it maladaptive adrenal signaling, right? But ultimately, what is signaling the adrenals? Stress. What kind of stress? Emotional, psychological, physical. But the stress is in the body needing to make energy at the cellular level that's not doing it at the level that it needs to. So adrenal fatigue has been a love-hate relationship for me, because I get mad when doctors say it's not real, as if someone would be faking their horrible feelings and wanting to be gaslit or scapegoat, or being told that there's nothing wrong with them and that's a fun thing to go through, right? They just want help. So I think it's unfortunate that doctors aren't taught that there's shades of gray in this problem, and that the majority of the problems actually occur outside of the adrenal glands, and you're going to have normal tests. And they're looking at blood tests. They're not looking at circadian rhythms throughout the day to see the cortisol spikes and sort of the ups and downs of them. So it's just so many things go wrong in the approach of the allopathic doctor of how to assess adrenal function, that they just, sort of close the book and say, oh, there's no such thing. So it's just so many different ways I can go on that.
Mm-hmm. So I know one of the things you focus on, and you mentioned it a couple of times, is genetics and how certain people are kind of predisposed to certain things. And most people, myself included, we don't know about these things. We don't know where are the weaker links in the chain are, as you said. So right. What are nutrigenomics and epigenetics, and how is this integrated into your practice and what you do?
Yeah, so nutrigenomics is sort of the combination, and we thank the drug companies for this, because they've done the research and they look at all the enzymes and they see what drugs make the enzyme work faster or slower. And typically you're going to get a drug that blocks the activity of that enzyme, so it can't perform as effectively. But my theory is, why not support that enzyme so you don't block it, but you make it work more effectively? So the enzymes need cofactors, nutrients. They don't want to have chemicals or toxins or pesticides or metals that will slow that enzyme down. And that enzyme is ultimately kind of like an assembly line, where once it passes that part of the assembly line, it goes to another part. So it's not functioning independently of other enzymes. So functional genomics is looking at all of the 3D relationships between enzymes, between the environment, between nutrients, between lifestyle, and understanding how your body makes energy, how it creates, how it basically builds things and breaks things down in the body. That's what I would say functional nutritional genomics are. And ultimately, when we inherit altered versions of these genes, my analogy is like a credit card card goes in a lot of people that are younger don't understand this, but the card goes in the machine sideways, and you used to do the credit card processing where a transparency would come out. And when you inherit an altered version of the DNA from your mom or your dad, the card goes in sideways and you're not able to make a good transparency. That helps people visualize what's happening. So you can't transcribe that enzyme, and as a result, that enzyme's not available. So an example where I see a lot of my people that are having challenges is they don't make the enzyme that helps to clear out histamine in the GI tract. And histamine can be made with foods that are fermented, foods that are alcohol, gluten, foods that are leftover, and even just stress in your immune system will produce a lot of histamine. And if you can't clear that out effectively, now the bucket begins to overflow. And now you start to have food sensitivities, breakdown of your gut lining, overgrowth of microbes, impact on your cortisol levels, all because you have a weakened ability to clear that histamine out. So that's an example.
Mm-hmm. And the other aspect of that was the epigenetics.
Well, so the epigenetics would be the things like the inhibitors. So like, for example, heavy metals, mercury, aluminum, those are major inhibitors of detox enzymes, or enzymes that help to make more energy, or nitrous oxide, the laughing gas that can deplete like a methionine synthase enzyme that's helpful for recycling your B12. I didn't realize I had that specific issue. And I remember always getting off the dental chair like I was a kid, and I was spacey, and that what will happen is that will deplete your glutathione, because you need B12 to be recycled to be able to make glutathione. But if the nitrous oxide, the epigenetic factor that slows that enzyme from working, all of a sudden you've put a wrench in the mechanics of being able to get your B12 working to make your glutathione. Now I'm going to have major problems with whatever glutathione does, which is reduce inflammation, detoxify things. So epigenetics would be the nitrous oxide, or epigenetics would be the aluminum, or even my wavelengths and my frequencies and my thoughts, my nutrition. If I don't have magnesium as a cofactor, those are epigenetics. So it's not just the genes are a foregone conclusion, you're screwed, you're never going to work well. It's going to be the combination of environmental inhibitors or even promoters that make the gene work faster, and or nutrients that cause the gene to work at an altered version above and beyond what you inherited from mom and dad.
So it's basically, it's not just this one-way street where you got the genes that you got and that's it, you're done.
Right. I always tell people when I do a genetic test result, when I see a lot of the perfect storm, they have major gene weaknesses and they've had major lifestyle challenges, mold, Lyme, Epstein-Barr, heavy metals, pesticides, physical injuries, traumas, all of the above. But I always tell them there's no bad news, because now we can understand with detail. I once had a dentist as a patient, and he said it's an exact science. And what's great about epigenetics and genetics is it's not an exact science, but you could at least understand, okay, here's the genes you have, here's the results you have on your blood work and the tests that validate what's going on. Here's the things that we know that help this gene work better or not work better. So you can really create, that's why I tell people, like, I don't put all my stock in genetics, but once I have the blueprint, I have the playbook on how I can help the genes work better.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my next question. Actually, once you have all this data on people, so to speak, all this raw data, is there like a roadmap that you generally follow in your mind, like how you generally approach new patients or certain issues that you see? Do you have some kind of pre-plan in your mind as to how you approach these things?
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to cellular respiration 101, right? If you're not respiring at the cellular level effectively and you're not using oxygen to produce ATP, you're going to have, it doesn't matter if there's heavy metals, or it doesn't, I mean, it does, but you need to get the engine working before you can pull those out of there. So it really makes, so I'll look at someone's genes and see, okay, we have some major issues with converting beta carotene into vitamin A. So I know I need to support that, because vitamin A is necessary to get copper into a very important protein so that you can clean the exhaust and so that you can make energy and you can deal with pathogens. So there's a hierarchy for sure. But then it comes down to the art of what that person is dealing with, what their subjective complaints are, and how fast or slow they want to do a full court press, or they want to just go slowly. So there's definitely an art, but there's also a priority system too.
So you create some kind of balance between what you know, what you see, what you find, and where the other person's at.
Right. And, and back to our original line of questioning, if they're not there mentally, like I just never get better. I'm never going to get better. I don't deserve to get better. Life sucks. Nothing works. Everything is bad. No matter how good our game plan is, that's got to be first too.
Yeah. What's going on between our ears makes a big difference in how things manifest in our life, like we said before. So
yeah, and I'm pretty selective now, Seth, which I can be, where I'm not just going to accept you because I know I can help you. I know that you're going to be coachable, right? I know that you are open to the idea that what you've tried hasn't worked because you haven't put the right tumbler lock in the right sequence. But that doesn't mean you've tried every single combination, because if you feel like you've tried every combination and nothing's going to work, and you're coming to me like, what are you going to do for me that I haven't done before? I'm not going to accept you as a patient. I just don't want to stack the cards in my favor, right? And then I also know they have to be decisive. Like, if they don't get this fixed, their life is on the line. Like when I went to, I could look in the mirror because I didn't know how I was going to get through chiropractic college, but I did it anyways because I knew it was going to matter. Like, if you don't approach it with that approach, like, this means you're going to have to make changes. Smoking a pack a day is not going to work anymore for you, right? So, and then lastly, it's resourcefulness, is because unfortunately, insurance doesn't pay for what I do, and people have already spent tens of thousands of dollars, and they'll spend lots of money on their teeth, but when it comes time to their health, they may not spend the same amount because of that vanity issue. So they have to realize that the return of energy, not the ROI, but the ROE, there's no value you could place on that when it comes time to how much your life is suffering. So I need to have those criterias too, Seth, if I'm going to work with someone, because I'm not going to try harder than they are for their health.
For sure. So how does that work within your practice? When someone wants to see you as a patient, how does that work? Do you do like an interview first? Like what's the introduction?
Yeah. It's like we call it a breakthrough call.
Okay.
Right. So I'll go through what's not working in with your health, and where do you want to get to, and how do we reverse engineer that? And if I feel I can help you based on what you've done, what you haven't done, based on how much it's I'm clear on how much it's impacting your health, and you're clear how much it's impacting your health, and you're ready to do something about it now, and it's something that I feel I can help, then I will give that person an offer to help them.
And in your practice, is it just you? Do you have a team? Do you work with other practitioners? How do you approach?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I have a staff, like I have a VA, I have an office manager, but it's pretty much just me. And I tell them I'm a key member of your health team. Right. And it's in a coaching relationship. So we'll meet consistently. And we also have Q&As that we do. So it's a hybrid between a group program and a one-on-one program. And then I've pre-recorded a lot of my modules so that they can do the learning on their own in the module system. And then I know the learning's in the doing, they're going to do that. Then we're going to meet, we're going to review their test results. But certainly they have neuros, endos, gastros on their team. And sometimes it's a battle in terms of, I don't think they should be taking this, but I say, listen, I'm Team Seth, and whatever your doctors are telling you to do, you have to make the informed decision. I'm supporting you in this realm of the practice, right? So it's not like my way or the highway, but at the same time, we need to talk about what you're doing now. Because I say a lot of the times, I'm a golf pro, and you have a really bad swing. You learned to swing the club incorrectly. It's hard enough to teach you how to swing it correctly, but it's even harder to help you learn how to unswing it incorrectly, right? So I have to do that as well.
Right. So what, I mean, and we're kind of talking about this already, but what would you say is like if you could paint the picture of an ideal patient for you, someone that you'd be able to serve them very, very well, what would that look like?
No, it's a great question. So they're really educated. Unfortunately or fortunately, they haven't had the support that they should have had, and they've put on I guess they've put on the pilot hat on their own head to figure out what's wrong because no one's helping them, and they've sort of exhausted their energy and their upper ceiling to what they can do. But they know that there's something missing in their health. They're not crazy. They know metabolically something's wrong and they're not getting answers. They know that there's a genetic component to it as well. They know that there's a lifestyle component. The good news is when I do my podcasts and my videos, I have a lot of people that will, it's a very complimenting, humbling thing, Seth, when you have people that have consumed your info and they've done like binges and they've done, like watching through all your videos, and then they come to me already like, okay, I'm ready to work with you. Because if someone's at the end of the call and we're doing a breakthrough call and they don't know what gluten is, I can't, like, you got too much more learning to do before we can have a conversation, right? So it's an educated person, and it's a person that is willing to do whatever it takes to get their health back, right?
Yeah, because sometimes that's at least the mindset. Like we've spoken about that already a couple of times. I mean, the mindset in which we go into any situation, but specifically about optimizing our health is crucial.
Right, exactly. Yeah, as I say, like, I've cared more for people's health getting better than they have, and I won't do it anymore. I already had my own health challenges. I don't need to, like, I use the analogy, like, you're in the ocean and you're sinking, and I'm sending you a life preserver and you're kicking and screaming to come into the boat. I just don't do that. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's tough in situations like that because I mean, we have compassion for people, but you can only help people that want to or able to receive the help.
Right. And there'll be times too, I'll do these breakthrough calls and they're a bear with a sore tooth. They're angry, they're miserable, but if they're open to connecting and really having a rapport and understand that, look, I'm asking you these questions out of curiosity, out of concern, out of caring, and I want to help you. Are you going to be open with not just me, with yourself? And can we peel away those layers? And if so, I'll do whatever I can, even if I don't work with you. So sometimes you get there with people, which is great, and sometimes you don't. And it's sad because I could help this person, but they're just in a bad place.
Yeah. So everybody, that's a great rundown to close things off. But as the last question, I always like to end with this idea. That if this were the last time you ever had to share your thoughts and you could only share 3 things that people should start implementing in their lives immediately to improve their health, what would they be?
That's a great question. So, it would be, you started off with gratefulness, right? But I think it's got to be with your family members. And sometimes, like, I'm estranged from a lot of my family, and I've come to terms with it, but I'm not estranged with all of my family. And we don't know when our time's over, and we want to enjoy every moment. And really, friends that you have that sometimes we take for granted or we don't realize how important they are, and our family members too, we might have different disagreements, but really cherishing the family. I think that's number one. Number 2 is finding what it is that you're passionate about. Right? Because that is energizing. It really does. I mentioned oxytocin earlier. That releases oxytocin when you have purpose and you have passion and you have connection and belonging. And oxytocin is an amazingly healing self neurotransmitter that can do so much, for sure. And then the last one would be, I guess it would be, don't put yourself, last. Put yourself first at that time too, because with a lot of people, and myself included, they tend to be empathic people where the world news impacts them, their friends and family come to them, and they're willing to give themselves more than they are to themselves to other people. And I think when the plane's going down, there's a reason we put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, right? Because if we don't have our health, we can't be there for that other person the way we want. And I tell people in a loving way that you're being selfish by not being selfish, right?
Yeah. It's I completely resonate with that one because it's that kind of age-old saying that you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
So
yeah. Yeah.
All right, Joel, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for watching The Art of Mindful Medicine. You can find out more about Dr. Joel Rosen on Instagram. It's at dr.joelrosen. His website is thetruthaboutadrenalfatigue.com, and his YouTube channel is also The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue. Are there any other outlets people can reach you on or see?
We have Facebook too, right? We have Facebook, and I actually just starting to create my own site, Dr. Joel Rosen, so drjoelrosen.com as well. But Seth, I appreciate the interview. You had me. I think I got a little sweat underneath my arm. So, yeah. Good, great questions.
Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Please click all those buttons down there, the like, subscribe, and share. And you can always see future episodes on this YouTube channel, The Art of Mindful Medicine, or my website, www.mindful.doctor. And as always, I like to end with a quote. So this is from, I apologize if I ruined this name, but Prasad Mahes. The mind is like water. When it's turbulent, it's difficult to see. When it's calm, everything becomes clear. So thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Joel, thank you again.
Thank you.